Imperial Lounge presents a night call
Reggae Dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae Dancehall by the beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
Use them, it's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like Malcolm. 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ, or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday, or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records at 07931 152 448, or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, dubplates and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
I was terrified about sharing the vulnerabilities of people with difficulties reading and spelling words. However, I could see the value in sharing, and I have taken the time to make some notes about this in my book, Dyslexic: The Silent Difference. You can get your copy now at www.a1tribe.com or amazon.com or amazon.co.uk. Thank you again, everyone, for your support.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
You see, it's here. You see. New feature coming from World Jam Global Radio in 2018. World Jam Global Top 10. To vote for your favorite artist, go to twitter.com/WorldJamGlobal or facebook.com/WorldJamGlobal. So pick the right track where you want to have in your car, at your house, a rock. At them.
Okay.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
It's another Saturday night.
I already did my time.
It's Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. And have we got a show for you?
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did.
Just give me a few moments as I continue to prepare for this evening show.
In the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the street. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Okay, on today's show, we're looking at the voice of a father.
Already did my
It ain't rocket science, it's murder. We got Brian Gallagher, father of Travis Possault.
I was a drug dealer.
We've got Brian Guilford. We've got John H. Crawford.
I know what I had to do.
And we have Victor White. Four fathers grieving for the loss of their loved one.
Admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
Supported by Jerry Summers, former chief of police and author,
The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it.
champion of police reform.
And done, my brain was so numb, I was a real fool.
Also supported by my
Nobody's jump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot of
assistant producer,
the real Terminator, much
Teresa.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
We're really looking forward to an informative and challenging show.
Life in prison.
Big shout outs going out to our audience wherever you might be. This side of the pond, the other side of the pond, UK, USA.
Already did my time, paid for my crime.
We thank you for your support, your encouragement, and your commitment.
Already did
This is a battle for truth,
my crime. Already did.
and we champion it here on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time.
Dwayne Thompson says, ready, let's go, let's have a great show. Looking forward to it, Dwayne.
My time. I paid for my crime.
Very shortly we're going to be talking to four fathers
I paid for my
who have all lost a loved one dearly.
Already did my time.
I remember we did the show on John Crawford's son
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
about 3 years ago.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never.
It's a show that still touches me today.
I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling
We
my.
covered the show on Victor White the 3rd
I must admit,
last week.
all kind of stupid shit. Now I sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb.
We did Brian Gallagher,
but I was nobody.
father of Travis Possault. Possault. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing it right. Possault.
I'd shoot you up and spit you out.
Was also the wife of my producer, Teresa.
Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time.
We did that one about a year ago.
I paid for my crime.
And we have a first-time guest in Brian Guilford.
Things are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Who lost his son, Devin Guilford.
Trying to cope with this living hell. Trying to cope with this living hell. Yes I am, yes I am, yes I am, yes I am, yes I am. Trying to cope with this living hell. This living hell, this living hell, this living hell. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. drive-by killers, stop them. It ain't about nothing. He who was out sin, let him cast the first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide, and put down those knives, stop stabbing each other. Yeah.
By the way, Lorraine Thompson, I'll tell you in a minute. That track was specially written for me by none other than Ronnie Canada, former backing vocalist with the Blue Notes from Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, a dear friend of mine's, and given to me specifically for this show. It's called Paid for My Crime. I want to say good evening going out to each and every single one of you who are listening in from wherever you might be. How are you doing? Yolanda McNair, great friend and supporter, and a big shout out going out to everybody else who is tuning in from whatever part of the world you may be in. I want to say a big thank you to my guests who have all agreed to be here. We're waiting for John Crawford Sr. to come and join us. He was on the call just a short while ago, but I think he's trying to find himself a quiet room because he's got his grandchildren running wild, and there was a lot of noise and disturbance taking place. But hey, we're here for another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. You can get us live on www.worldjamglobalradio.com or follow us on Facebook, which is, you can follow me, Kervin Julian, on my personal Facebook page, or you can get us on Issues Today or the World Jam Global Radio Facebook page. And we are streaming live right around the world. Now, our guests today, and we have many, so this is going to be a real off-the-chain event. So first and foremost, I want to introduce my producer, if she's there, right? Because she's had a very tough week, and we're just going to support her as best as we can. She's listening in, and will be supporting me in any way that I need. So hi, Teresa, are you there? She's not talking. She's been to the dentist and she's been to the doctors this week, so she's not in good health. So she can't hear me at the moment. And also alongside to support, we have a dear friend and a regular supporter of this show, been on this show on several occasions, supporting in one way or another. We have the Honourable Mr. Jerry Summers. How are we doing, Jerry?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, the problem was my end, not your end. I actually had the microphone still turned off. Sorry, Teresa, we didn't hear a word that you said.
Oh.
Sorry, let me do that again. It was my fault because I turned them off while I'm doing my introductions, and I forgot to turn them all back on again, and I'm wondering why nobody was speaking to me. All right, but let me introduce my guest, my first guest, my producer, Teresa. How are you doing, Teresa?
Really good. Thanks.
I know you've had a bit of a tough week this week, and especially with the support of Yolanda. I know Yolanda has supported you well this week, and with the love of your family, you've managed to get through it, and you're here for another week, so thank God for that. And thank you for all the work that you're doing behind the scenes to support Issues Today, and the work that's going out helping other families who are also struggling with an issue that you've obviously suffered with yourself. And we're going to be hearing a lot more from your husband later on, who's also a guest on the show, and returning guest as well, by the way. All right, so we thank you for being there and being in the sidelines. And she's the one that's going to be prompting me and finding the information that I need as and when I need it during the show. So thank you very much for that, Teresa. Let me now go back to the person that was just about to speak when I cut him off, the Honourable, and he's been a regular guest and friend of this show, author and former Chief of Police from Idaho, Mr. Jerry Summers. How are we doing, Jerry?
I'm terrific, and it's an honor to be with you again, Kervin.
And Jerry's going to be offering all the sideline advice and commentary as we speak to these fathers, which I'll be introducing now one by one, and they'll be telling you a little bit about their own story. So I think I'm going to start off because we've been missing him for a while, and I don't have no favourites or preference, but I remember doing this story over 3 years ago, and it was one of the most powerful stories that I've ever seen. And we're probably going to talk about it in greater detail because we haven't been able to do so in the current run of Issues Today shows, although it's something that I refer to quite often. But we're going to speak to John Crawford Sr. How are we doing, John?
I'm doing well, Kirby. How about yourself?
I must say that the years are looking after me, and it's just great, and it's an honour to be able to share this platform with you fathers who have gone through this battle, and you especially, who have been going through it for such a long time. How has things been for you since we last spoke, John?
Well, pretty much we're just, believe it or not, we have not gone to trial yet. We are the only case that has not gone to trial since that beginning time frame, which was in 2014. So hopefully here in February, we have a tentative date scheduled for February 2019. So hopefully, we'll get.
Okay, well, if you'd just like to introduce yourself, tell them who you are, where you're from, just a little bit about yourself, I'd appreciate that, please, John.
Okay, sure. My name is John Crawford Jr. I am the father of John Crawford III, who on August the 5th of 2014 was shot and killed in a neighborhood Walmart in Beaver Creek, Ohio. He was 22 years old at the time, my son was, and he was going to get some items to go to a cookout with a friend of his, and so they went to the Walmart, and in the midst of shopping, he received a phone call from the mother of his children, and he told his newly girlfriend that he needed to take the call, and she said, "Sure, I understand." She being a mother herself, and while he was on the phone, so he just began to kind of walk and talk, and while so he picked up a pellet gun, an airsoft rifle, at the local Walmart there, and he began walking around the store with the pellet gun. Now, keep in mind, Ohio is an open carry state, so nothing, no love lost there, no big deal. Nobody reacted towards it or anything. He just picked it up and he decided to go off an aisle by himself and just have a conversation with the mother of his children. And unfortunately, someone called and lied, just flat out lied and said, "We have a black man about 6 foot tall or taller in here with a gun holding women and children up." And long story short, essentially they came in, they cited him, and they shot him.
We're going to go into that in much greater detail, John, as we progress through the show, because there's a lot of stuff that surrounds that. There was the evidence that we looked at. That's right. There was the parallel CCTV, which ran parallel with the 911 call, which proved that the 911 call was fake. Well, was exaggerated and creatively inventive, to say the least.
That's correct.
But we're going to talk about that. But also, I think one of the most telling things was you walked in to his girlfriend's house as he spoke his last words before he died. Am I correct?
Well, that wasn't his girlfriend's house. That was actually his mother's house. I just happened to. I was in the city that day, and actually I went to. It was kind of ironic because I went there to pick up my son to take him out to dinner. And his mother told me that he was not there, that he was gone with his new girlfriend, and so I said, okay, well, I'll just wait on him later, no big deal. And just so happened, the mother of his children happened to be at the same location as we were. So, I didn't know she was talking to my son at the time, but the mother of his children was actually there at the same location. The three of us were at the same location, and my son was off with his new girlfriend, and but she needed to talk to him regarding the children. And so when I pulled up to the residence, I saw her on the phone. I actually saw the mother of his children, Lisa Johnson, talking on the phone. I just didn't know it was he that she was talking to, so
So we're going to go into greater detail. So, but there's a lot more that goes with that particular story, and it was absolutely painful. I remember telling it on Issues Today over 3 years ago, and it still touches me today. So thank you very much for that, John. We'll be back with you in a very short while. Let's quickly go over to Brian Gallagher. If you are ready, Brian, if you could just introduce yourself. We spoke about a year ago, and I want to thank you for allowing your wonderful wife to be my producer. She's a tremendous asset. Sorry that I've got to steal her from you for as many days a week as I do, but it's an honor. She's doing a great job, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Kervin. Happy to be here, and good morning or good afternoon for where you're at. My name is Brian Gallagher. Currently, my wife and I, Teresa, we're living in Utah, but we were, and at the time when Travis was killed, we were living in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Travis was going to help out a friend at like a sports memorabilia shop, setting up some displays. So him and his girlfriend at the time, this was probably around midnight, were parked in the back. They had an older vehicle, and he had some plates on it that weren't his. Cops at the time were investigating instances of people breaking into cars, stealing guns. There was an ATF officer with the Rock Springs policeman. Back, Travis got out, and I don't know why, but he ran, and the Rock Springs police officer told the ATF agent, "That's Travis," and the ATF agent chased after him, and probably maybe a third of a mile, a few blocks, caught up to him, basically beat the crap out of him, and more Rock Springs police officers showed up, and he was handcuffed, pepper sprayed, thrown to the ground, kicked, beaten, pepper sprayed some more, and it was, he complained. He said he had trouble breathing, and basically the cops laughed at him. It was, if you can talk, you can breathe, so just shut the fuck up. And moments after that, he just fell over and passed away. And we never really, we don't get any straight answers from the cops, from the district attorney, ATF. It's been a struggle for 14 years now.
Yeah. The sad thing is that when we recorded this show over a year ago, there was so much interference. They kept interfering with the signal. They tried to bring the show down, and then the recorded video just disappeared off the internet. So I'm really pleased that we're able to revisit that story again today, and I'm fully aware of the.
And
go on.
With us being on, I wouldn't guarantee you that this doesn't have any issues with it. It's been harassment.
Yeah.
For years. Treese raised hell in Rock Springs. I mean, she called the police department every day, and I mean, talking with the chief of police, talking with lawyers, letters to the editor at the newspaper, and it was harassed. I mean, we had cops show up, drive by our house at 2 a.m, spotting their spotlights through our windows for no reason. Cops that, we lived at this house for 15 years, and then all of a sudden we have patrol cars parked up from the house. Supposedly, well, this is where I decided to eat my lunch, or driving down the easeway behind the house. This is crazy.
Yeah, well, we're going to try and persevere with it today, and we're just going to hope that we're going to be able to get through this without too much of a interruption or distraction. Another returning guest is Mr. Victor White Sr., the Reverend Victor White Sr., and we interviewed him last week on the back of the Sugartown Discovery HD documentary, which was about his son, Victor White III, known as Lil Vic. Hi, Victor, Reverend Victor, shall I say?
Yes, sir. Brother Kervin, how are you? And the listening artists. Yes, indeed, man. We appreciate you all. Yes, we're from Victor White Sr. of Lake Charles, Louisiana. But the death of my son occurred on March the 3rd of 2014 in New Iberia, Louisiana. They said that he was involved in a fight at the Hop-In store. And when he had left the store, they stopped him about a block away from the store and refused to take him back. And then when they put him in custody, supposedly for having less than a joint, supposedly searched him twice and put him in the backseat of a police cruiser. And it said that he shot himself in the back, and autopsy come out 5 months later, say he was shot in the chest. And so, and it's still disputable today on the reason why, because the stop was illegal. But here we are still almost 5 years later, and we are still seeking justice for it.
Again, this was another one of those very powerful stories that has shaken me. In fact, I've had debates all week in work with various different people who witnessed or who saw the show, tuned into the show last week. Some of my colleagues who was asking me, how is that possible? And we're going to be talking to Jerry, and hopefully Jerry can shed some light on this. But I'll save the questions for a little bit later. But thank you very much for that introduction, Victor. And we really look forward to going into this just a little bit deeper than we did last week, with your permission. Okay.
Yes,
our final guest, and it's the first time appearance for him, and I was just introduced to him this week, and he goes by the name of Brian Guilford, and I'll leave you to do the introductions. How are you doing, Brian?
Oh, good. Thank you, Kervin. My name is Brian Guilford. On February 28th, 2015, my son Devin Guilford, a 17-year-old, was killed by Officer Jonathan Frost in Mulliken, Michigan. He had been to a church youth night, and he was coming home. The church is about 7 miles straight shot to our house, and he was coming back to his girlfriend's to watch a movie, and on the way, he encountered a car with extremely bright headlights, and he flashed him once from a distance and got no response. He flashed him a second time, and it turned out to be Officer Jonathan Frost, who pulled him over and seemed to be angry right from the get-go. He said to Devin, so you flashed your headlights at me, and I didn't even have my brights on. And Devin said, yes, you did, sir. And it just progressed from there. Devin continued to argue the case, and Jonathan Frost had already pulled over 2, possibly 3 people for the same issue, so he knew his lights were extremely bright. And ultimately, he lost his cool and tried to drag Devin out of the car while he's still seatbelted. And he pulled his taser. Devin exited, got on his knees. That wasn't good enough. He had to get him on his stomach. Devin got on his stomach, and then he jumped on his back, and he tased him. And ultimately, 13 seconds later, he shot him 7 times. And just a horrendous situation. His story wasn't even close to lining up with reality. And I just never knew at the time that officers get away with this stuff, but now I do.
Wow. I mean, I'm left kind of speechless. So I'm aware that you settled for a considerable amount, but at the cost of the settlement will never repay or bring Devin back to life. Neither will it compensate for your grief or your family's loss. And I think there's many times where people get confused when there are settlements reached between the families and local authorities or whatever it is. And I don't think people actually understand how and why any family would agree to settle. Maybe you could just, from your perspective, you can shed some light as to your reasons, if you want to share, how you came to settle, why you settled, and whether or not there was still a pursuit for a criminal conviction, or what were the reasons. I'll leave that to you rather than me speculate.
Yes, we decided to settle because it's ultimately about the only chance or choice they give you. going into this, we didn't realize that once the district attorney clears Frost, it's either up to our attorney general. They're the only ones that can reopen it and ultimately do anything to him. So we sued civilly, and the Judge Maloney, you would almost have to read his report. I have parts of it in front of me. You know, he was just dumbfounded by it. But ultimately, we settled because all the lawyers advised us to, and they said you just never know what happens when you get in front of a jury. And I will tell you the truth, I didn't want to at all. It's a horrendous process, and my wife just couldn't stand to go on. The lawyers highly advised us to do it. And looking back, I'm very glad we did, just because the process they drag you through. I can't remember the name of the lady whose husband was killed in his garage. Someone called the police on him. He was killed in his garage. She sued. They gave them each $1 or something like that.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that? I don't know, but that was horrendous. And now I think back, I don't know how you could endure that if someone told you your loved one was worth $1. And you have to go through this process, I guess, until you can understand why someone would end up settling. Because at a point, you just want to get it over with and try to move on. And I will tell you one thing, money is nothing. The money, every day we say we just want our son and our old life back. The money can never compensate for a life and a child that you love and you've raised, and it's nothing. The only real justice we got, in my opinion, was Federal Judge Maloney and his ruling. He was so strong, pointing out all the discrepancies in the case, and that's why we settled, I guess. There was nothing to gain by moving forward either. There was no chance of prosecution unless someone else comes up with some more evidence.
Right, okay. I just want to bring in Jerry very quickly here. So, Jerry.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, you've heard the introductions from all of them. And before I bring you in, let me just say this. I normally put a lot of photos on the carousel. But if you guys remembered, I was asking people to send in photos and send in pictures so that I can put pictures of their loved ones into this carousel. I didn't get enough pictures back from you, although I got one from Devon. I got one from Brian for Devon. I've just been informed by one of our viewers, Yolanda in particular, that I've got so many pictures of Victor and his family on here that the other pictures ain't being shown. So even while we're talking, I'm going to be removing some, just so that the rotation moves a little bit quicker. I just felt the need to say that, if you guys don't mind. So forgive me while I do this. But if you're watching the carousel, or if you see the carousel and you think that it's been a favorite or something, it actually hasn't. It's just that I asked for these pictures, I didn't get them, so I've only got the pictures on there that I did get. And I'm going to just try and address that. I might even be able to find some pictures online and add to it as I go, so just bear with me on that. Anyway, very quickly, going back to Jerry. You've heard the opening introduction from our guests so far. What stands out for you first and foremost?
Well, first of all, I have to offer my condolences to all these gentlemen and the pain that they have endured at the hands of unscrupulous law enforcement. And for that, I would apologize on behalf of some of us who care very deeply about the profession and want to change the corruption and misconduct that goes on a daily basis. When I retired from police work in 2013, would have told you that probably only 3 to 5 people of the people that were in prison there wrongfully, and I've revised that. I believe it's probably 35%, and it's due to police misconduct and and prosecutorial misconduct. Brian is correct. The process is absolutely horrendous. The government has the power. They have the ability to not cooperate, not provide documents, and to basically run a family into financial ruin that's trying to seek justice for their loved one. That's the advice of many attorneys to settle a case, because it just go on forever. The emotional turmoil is much more difficult than the financial turmoil that any family has to endure. My initial thought is, and I've seen it over and over again.
We're just losing your signal there, Jerry.
To that, it looked like I lost you for a minute.
Yeah, I've got you now. You're back on.
Okay. When you run misconduct, then it's that thin blue wall, or that thin blue line, or that blue wall of silence, where officers will not speak ill of the officer who clearly did something wrong, which makes them an accomplice as far as I'm concerned. And you have administrations that won't hold them. Now, in a case where an officer is clearly wrong and they shoot somebody, and you have a prosecutor that has a reluctance to charge the officer criminally unless it's extremely egregious on video, it's because the pressure that they will incur from the police unions and the police departments, and our judges have just got to get better. Judge Malone sounded like a wonderful man, but they've got to get better at holding prosecutors and police chiefs and police officers accountable. And they tend to let the process work and overrule it. And it's just a battle for everyone when they're in a circumstance like that.
Do you know, again, Jerry, it sounds like when you're listening to Brian Guilford's story, right? It sounds like you've got an officer, right, who got frustrated because an individual that also got frustrated at the way he was being treated, because he couldn't understand why the officer was, because it almost looks like it was harassment. When you hear Brian tell the story, and he talks about
it was abuse and harassment, clear-cut political. It was clear-cut abuse of power. But based on the circumstances I heard, Brian, no reason to doubt him. It was absolutely abuse of power and excessive use of force, and Devin should be dead today.
Yeah,
that's why this mayor, state, whoever the officer was, settled with them, because they knew they weren't going to win that on a civil basis.
But here's the thing, right? The fact that they've got the civil lawsuit, or they've been paid out. I'm with or without the payouts. Isn't there still a right for a criminal prosecution?
Absolutely could be.
Yes.
Unfortunately, you're not going. I mean, it was criminal. There's no doubt in what was laid out, and the fact that they've settled. There's no doubt that there was criminal activity. I don't even know if that officer is still employed. But as a chief of police in a situation like that, an officer would not be employed with my department if he'd done something like that, and I would have been recommending criminal prosecution. Because, the badge, the law enforcement badge, is supposed to be a badge of trust. The officer is given the authority by citizens to take certain actions that citizens aren't allowed to take, and in return for that authority, the citizens expect trust, and above, they expect ethical treatment and ethical behavior above question, and they're not getting it.
Integrity is a major characteristic, or should be, of someone who is serving their community. And there seems to be so little integrity in all of these cases.
What tends to happen, is if you look at a background of for law enforcement, your integrity pretty much has to be above reproach. They have to make sure you're not. There are a lot of things, references and referrals and neighbors need to say about you in order to get you into that position. Then once you get in there, after several years, you start to get warped. And there's a culture within law enforcement that it's us against them. And we protect ourselves. And no matter what somebody else does, you don't speak ill of another officer. You don't point out something. And that has to change. And it has to change from the top down, because when you have that kind of authority with a lack of transparency, then it's just ripe grounds for corruption. And what we're seeing is that officers are exceeding their authority and other officers are not speaking out.
Yeah,
that's spot on.
And that's very true. And the fact that other officers are not speaking out causes people who have integrity to look at them differently also. They're actually tarring themselves with the same brush, in my opinion. Now, here's another question, because I don't want to jump off Brian Guilford or Devon's story. But again, just for your review, Jerry, the story of Victor White, and I want to come to John Crawford very soon, but the story on Victor White III, what I don't know if you know anything about that particular case, Jerry, but how does an individual who is handcuffed behind his back, right? How does he get to reach a gun that the police have said that they've patted him down twice and not found a weapon before they put him into a vehicle? But then they claim that he's now been able to reach into his waistband while his hands were handcuffed behind his back, retrieve a gun and shoot himself in the chest, committing suicide. When this young man had everything to live for. And yet you've got an authority who actually think that the people are dumb enough to swallow that version of events. And hey, they got a point, because the officer hasn't been charged. Or has he been charged? In fact, I let Victor, because I remember there was some officers fired and some stuff went on, but I let Victor update us on that. But how does an officer actually think that he can actually get away with that type of presentation of evidence?
It's absolute arrogance on the part of the officer, knowing that the findings behind that are that the other officers involved are going to manipulate facts and findings, clear that officer. That is a corrupt department. No other way to put it. Yeah. I'm looking at several cases pro bono in which clearly.
One second, Jerry. Once again, there is some absolutely there is terrible noise coming out from one of these lines, and we really need to manage this. Otherwise, it's really going to disrupt this broadcast. Those that have got the noise know that they've got the noise. They need to mute their mics or turn the noise down. But please be respectful to other people while they're speaking. Go ahead, Jerry.
It's just a matter of corruption where they know they're going to get away with it. I've seen 2 cases in this last week that I'm doing some work on a pro bono basis, where the individual was gunned down by police, and there is no way to explain it. In fact, in one of them, it's clear that the individual could not have shot himself, and in the manner that they say. So the evidence and the blood spatter on the scene just simply doesn't hold that to be true. And yet you have people supporting that and the family having to fight it. An officer, somebody in the back of their car, it's possible that you can search somebody and not find something, but it becomes very unlikely and improbable that somebody can have a gun behind their waistband, handcuffed, or in the front of their waistband, handcuffed. They'd have to slip the cuffs, and the officer would see them trying to slip the cuffs off into the front of them, and very few people are really that limber to do it. There are people that can do it, and then to retrieve a gun in the waistband, if there's a gun in the front waistband, that officer simply did not search them. It's not possible. It's not even probable. And then for findings to say, he shot himself, and then it comes out he shot himself in the chest. That's not even a normal mode of suicide. So most likely, my gut would say that you had an officer with a throwdown weapon, and he shot him when he was sitting in the back seat unarmed, and that's just horrendous.
Victor, maybe you might want to update us. The Sugartown discovery documentary highlighted the depths and the lengths that you went to. What was the eventual outcome, Victor?
Yes, sir. Well, actually we're showing the outcome of the video. They settled. It was a settled case, but we're still fighting because here's one of the things. He wasn't in just a regular set of handcuffs. He had those hinge handcuffs on, Smith & Wesson hinge handcuffs, and so therefore, that was a little bit even more tedious to even get out of. And on top of that, even though that he said he shot himself in the chest, he was still found handcuffed behind his back. And on one of the other things with that is not only that, he was shot on the right side and he's left-handed. In the corner, they didn't seem to realize that, because as with myself, I write with my left hand, but I do everything else with my right hand. And so therefore, my son himself, he is actually left-handed. But they did 10 officers, and not only that, my son was not the only case there. And under the present sheriff, which is Louis Alco, there has been 10 unexplained deaths under police custody. And as the speaker was saying earlier, is that they know that they could get away with it. They was getting away with it, and no one really challenged them until my son's death. And we really challenged everything and every minute of it. They challenged everything and every minute of it. So therefore, it was a shocking to them, and they thought that it was just going to lay down and go away.
Jerry, when you get somebody like Victor White who just ain't going to lay down and play dead, is that a real thorn in the side of local police officers?
The corrupt ones, yes, it is. And if you have in a department that is an ethical department that is working to find the truth, you'll never find a ruling that Victor had to deal with regard to his son. Even state police that come in to investigate will work to clear an officer rather than to find the truth. And that's one of the biggest travesties in the American judicial or jurisprudence system, is that we're seeing it over and over again. And the way the process is supposed to work is the police investigate, the prosecutors look at and investigate the police, and the judges hold the prosecutors accountable. And it's not working that way. What we're seeing is police misconduct or corruption. We're seeing prosecutors refuse to challenge the police or charge an officer because of the political ramifications of them keeping their office. And we're seeing judges overlook the malfeasance of prosecutors. In my mind, it is a systematic and systemic breakdown of the way the American jurisprudence system is supposed to work.
Absolutely. Did you want to respond to that, Victor?
Yes, and as he was saying, the sheriff that is there now, right, he's a 30-year veteran of the state police, and when he called them in to investigate, it was like he was doing an investigation himself. And what they did in essence was he allowed, even though they said they was bringing him in because of the noise that was making on the outside, but he still investigated himself, and they turned the information over to the state. So the Louisiana State Police Criminal Investigation Division really did not do the investigation. What they did was they reviewed the investigation that was done by the Iberia Parish Sheriff's Department. And as Jerry was saying, which I concur, is that, you can't have the police investigate the police.
That's right. Absolutely. John, did you want to come in there, John Crawford?
Well, yeah, I'm sitting back and I'm listening to the commentary, and I think about these cases. I live and breathe these cases, obviously, every day. And I just think about my case. One of the reasons why we're still at it, and the former officer was spot on, Jerry, I believe, regarding the process. And that's one of the things I didn't know at the time, that I was the only parent with the background that I have. I'm certified in juvenile justice and adults, and I used to be a state officer. I was a parole officer. I also worked in the penitentiary for several years. And so my climate, if you will, is criminal justice. And so, of course, they didn't know that at the time they killed my son. So, I started following protocol of what most police would do. In fact, I've been to the academy more times than the chief of police, than most chief of police, So I started doing basically what they do. I started interrogating them, if you will, when my son was killed within 24 hours. We were there. My son got shot. I was there. I was only 60 miles away from him. So once I heard him take his last breaths on the phone, because the mother of his children had the phone at the same location where we were. And I just happened to hear her say, "Oh, Mr. John, they shot him. And, it took about a minute or so for that to register, for me to process what she was saying, because I was in the house. And I said, she was screaming hysterically. And I said, wait a minute, they shot him. I said, oh my God. So I jumped off the couch and I ran outside and I took a phone and I heard my son, essentially, he was taking his last breaths. By that time, the paramedics got there and they were trying to tell him, stay with us, sir, just stay with us. And he took one last big gasp. He had just said, Dad, where's my dad? Where do I need my dad? And that was it. He was gone. And of course, his mother was there with me. But I don't think that she knew at that particular time that he was gone. And we immediately got in the car. I went to Dayton, to the hospital, and they told me that, he was gone. But in listening to the protocol and in all of this information that I'm listening to, the officer was spot on in terms of, first of all, you have the culture there. There's just a corrupt culture in some of these departments. We had the Attorney General, Mike DeWine, gave me his word face to face. He said, Mr. Crawford, when what they did was they hurry up and looked me up, because I started interrogating the officers. I was asking, well, how did you kill my son? Did you double tap? Did you, I'm using the same jargon essentially as that they use. And so they knew right then. They said, wait a minute, who is this guy? Is he a cop? I never disclosed to them who I was, what my profession was, so they immediately looked me up and they found out what my pedigree was, if you will. And everything changed at that point. They stopped with the BS. They didn't try to, it just almost completely ceased. And we're just staying with the litigation aspect of it, if you will. But they stopped with all the BS, with all the cockamamie stories and all the innuendos, what they do, it just stopped. And I said that to say this, to reiterate what the officer was saying, is that, we have a culture. People don't understand that there's a culture within the department, unfortunately. And it's one of those things that until we hold prosecutors accountable for their jobs, for doing their jobs, it's going to continue. It's going to be business as usual until we can get to legislature and start writing up laws that will prosecute them for not doing their jobs, and will prosecute even judges, which is most of them have to be impeached. That's an impeachment process, but everybody needs to be held accountable. And until we get to the point where we have something, like instrument in place that will do that, it's going to continue to be business as usual regarding these cases. And we're right now, Kervin, we're really at the verge of a civil war, because within the last 5 years, since my son got killed, which was 4 years ago, we've had more death among police officers. I don't know if you all been keeping up with the statistics, but there's been more cops killed within the last 5 years, on record, than ever before. And that number is going to heighten. There's been more white people killed, most of the times in these situations, frankly, it's almost someone of color. there's a 9-to-1 ratio. We're 9 times to get killed by police officers more so than whites. But there have been cases where white people have been killed, and you never hear about those cases though. They either hurry up and settle, or whatever the ramifications of the case may be, but you just don't hear about it. It's not exploited like the black cases, because there's more of the black cases. We're the primary target, but I think that all of it needs to be addressed.
And here's the thing, John. You've hit on a very good subject there, because I think I want to raise this as we speak. We've said it on many occasions, and I don't actually feel any problems in saying this. When I first got involved with police brutality and killed by cops, I really took a real understanding of the Black Lives Matter theme. And I'm not saying that black lives don't matter, because black lives do matter. I'm a black man. Take a look at my picture, you'll see. All right? But I think the one thing that has been continually hidden in all of this is the actual amount of white kids that are also. So it's when, again, there is a racism within the system, but the biggest issue is not racism. The biggest issue is the corruption within the police force, right? And the collusion within the police force, and the hiding, and because even black cops are supporting white cops when black guys are being killed. So it's not the racism that's the real key issue here. It's the corruption within the force. And if we're going to start seeing the numbers of either black, Latino, or white people reduced in being killed by cops, we've got to start tackling the corruption in the police force. Is that correct, Jerry? Oh, sorry, John.
Yes, that is correct. But you're spot on, Kervin. But again, we still have to, there is an element there. The racism, you can't, that can't be minimized, because again,
absolutely not. You said it just.
But you're spot on. You're spot on, because my thing, I tend to look at this thing entirely, and I look at it case by case. That's what's given me the opportunities that I've had. I actually turned down FBI, TBI. I rather, I was a parole officer for a while, but my thing is, because I'm not cliquish, and these things are, and I commend Jerry. I believe it's Jerry. I commend, if he was that type of chief of police, as is the chief of police in South Carolina when Walter Scott got shot in the back 8 times. He flat, and I can't recall his name right now, but he flat out said when the video was out, when they had transparency, he said that he would be indicted and convicted, and he was a man of his word. Okay, he said that from the get-go. He said, based on what we've seen, if this evidence is showing that there's corruption, that he's wrong, he will be indicted and he will be convicted. And he was spot on, because that I believe that the officer got 15 or 20 years, who killed Walter. And that was the second federal case taken next to ours. We were the first federal case taken in 2014, the first, okay? And we're the only case with a corporate entity affixed to it. And it happens to be the richest family, American family in America, and that's the Walton family, Walmart. So we're fighting a whole nother monster. We're fighting 2 monsters. We're fighting the criminality of what happened, and we're fighting corporate America as well. So they knew I'm not going away. I'm not going anywhere. This has been my.
I just want to very quickly broaden, because John Crawford III's case appears to be so long ago and not as prominently spoken about, especially even in today. I just want to broaden it a little bit, if I can, please, John.
Absolutely.
Because my understanding, and I just want to give people a real understanding of what took place that day, because you've skirted around what happened with the phone call. You've skirted around what happened when he went into the shopping mall. You skirted around the fact that he picked up the pellet gun, which was unpackaged. And so therefore it may well be that John Crawford III saw something that was dangerous, unpackaged, sitting on a shelf, and his possible intention could have been to hand it in on the desk as he walked past, because it appears, right, and again I'm only assuming, that somebody else had opened out that gun, because it wasn't John Crawford III who opened it, and had a look at it and left the unpackaged pellet gun, BB gun, on the shelf where John Crawford found it. Now, here's the thing. This guy, and I forget what his name was. You can refresh my memory if you can, please, John. The guy that made the 911 call.
Ronald Ritchie.
Ronald Ritchie, that was his name. So Mr. Ritchie, right, calls 911 and says that there's a guy out here, right, in the shopping mall, and he's waving a gun around the place, right? And in fact, at one point, he also suggests, because there's a woman and a child going around with a trolley, that he's waving the gun at the woman and the child. Now, when you see the CCTV and the 911 call, when they're played parallel, you realize you actually see the woman and the child go past the aisle. She never goes down his aisle. She never goes anywhere near him. She crosses his aisle, looks down the aisle and carries on going. Doesn't go down the aisle that John Crawford was at, and John Crawford never saw her. But the guy, it actually shows all of this on the CCTV, right? But here's the thing, and here's the biggest thing for me, right? 911 are called and the police respond, and I understand that the police need to respond if somebody calls and says, hey, there's a guy in my shop, or there's a guy in the shop waving a gun around, right? And he's posing a risk, or he's posing a threat. I understand that the police need to respond. But here's my problem with this. When the police arrive, their process should have been, in my opinion, and I ain't no law enforcement officer, but I would have imagined you arrive on the scene where somebody has told you that there's the guy waving a gun and he's posing a threat. But yet you get to the scene and there's nobody running out screaming. That would have been flag number one for me. Right? That would have been flag number one. Nobody's running out screaming, going, oh, there's a bad guy in there with a gun. Right? First and foremost. You walk into the shop and there's nobody looking stressed. There's nobody trying to get out of the way. There's nobody running. There's nobody screaming. I can't understand for the life of me why in 3.2 seconds John Crawford lay dead when not a single officer approached a single member of staff to confirm whether or not there was a problem in their store.
Well, you know what happened was the officers actually, when Officer Sean Williams was actually the officer who shot and killed my son. There was there was a sergeant that came with him. But ever since the Columbine situation, now you don't have to wait on. They no longer have to wait for backup per se. They can actually engage, and so this guy, he was just his whole profile. When you get the history of him, he's just a rogue. There's no other way to put it. Okay, he shot and killed a serviceman 3 years prior to my son. Okay, he's the only one in the history of Beaver Creek on that force that's Beaver Creek has never had a homicide. Okay, to their defense, never had a homicide till they hired this guy, and his dad is a cop, and the Attorney General and his dad and the Chief of Police, they all went to law school together. So you got the good old boy system really, really brewing here. But getting back to the scene, when they were on scene, when he arrived on scene, the sergeant and they actually asked patrons in Walmart, where's the guy that's, where's the situation? And they were like, what are you talking about? What situation? So they kind of skipped over that and they started piercing down. It was basically a witch hunt at that point. They started looking down the aisle and they came to aisle 6, and the sergeant was the first one to see my son. And he looked at him. The sergeant looked down the aisle. He saw a young man by himself, okay, bothering no one. But by the time he tried to get his attention, his subordinate, Sean Williams, came around his backside, sighted him, and shot him within 3/100ths of a second. Fastest kill known to mankind. We've got the forensic evidence to show you. Within 3/100ths of a second of him, after he sighted him, he shot him and subsequently killed him. Okay, so there was no protocol, if you will. Okay, there was none. You can't do anything in 3/100ths of a second, but it was already premeditated from his angle. Now, from the sergeant's perspective, the big question, is why didn't you shoot? Because the sergeant saw him first. So if there was some threat, if there was a sense of threat, then surely the sergeant would have engaged. He wouldn't have just stood there and done nothing.
Absolutely.
You know, so but you're spot on with that. There was no, he didn't excite any panic. There was no, in fact, when you see the footage, it's people are just walking around as usual because again, Ohio is an open carry state. So they see people open carrying all the time. Not footnote here though, not necessarily black people. You don't see a whole lot of black people open carrying, and rightfully so. It's unfortunate, it's the law, but we just tend to be more cognizant of doing things like that, you know, but taking those type of actions. But nevertheless, that was the whole situation in our case, and there were 205 cameras on them. So you can't lie, you know. In our situation, there was just no way that this officer could lie his way out of it. Although he's trying, and he's still trying. You know, he said my son turned towards him and pointed the rifle towards him, and of course he felt. Here comes the song that everybody knows. I felt threatened for my life, and I felt threatened for my partner's life and everybody else. So I had to engage, and he shot him twice. He did double tap, which they're trained to do most of the time. He shot him twice, and that theory obviously is blown out the water because my son had 6 holes in his body. He shot him with an AR-15, about 25, 30 yards away. Okay, my son had 6 holes in his body. Okay, you can't get 6 holes in your body from 2 shots. If my son was facing him, where we're trained to shoot center mass, okay? If he shot him twice, there would be 4 holes at max, enter and exit wound for each shot, okay? That wasn't the case in our case. My son had 6 holes in his body. So where did the other 2 holes come from? Okay, the other 2 holes came from because he did not shoot him center mass. He was shot from the side, and the first bullet entered his forearm, his left forearm, went straight through him, ricocheted off of it, and hit his right forearm and went straight through it. So that gave you 4 holes right there with 1 shot. It broke his arm. That's when you see him drop the pellet gun. He had 6 holes in his body when you see him drop the pellet gun. The second one hit him in the liver and came out his kidney. Okay, that was good. So, and even through all that, he still, his brain was in the fight or flight. He bounced up from that, ran around the end cap, and what you don't see on the footage is there's actually officers on that other side of the end cap. Okay, so when my son ran around the end cap after he was shot, he saw the officers, so he doubled back around to the aisle in which he got shot, and he met up with the officer that shot him. And do you know he still handcuffed him, got on top of him and handcuffed him
while he was shot?
And he essentially bled out there on the floor. They would like for you to believe that he made it all the way to Dayton's hospital, but that just wasn't the case. They didn't know at the time that I heard my son take his last breath. You know, I heard him call, and it was over right there. He bled out on the floor of Walmart. You know,
that must have been absolutely heartbreaking.
And it still is, and it just pisses me off. Pardon my vernacular, but you know that I've worked for a system all of these years, and I have 4 generations of servicemen that have fought for this country, and willfully so. And then you turn around, and I have to fight them, but I know how to fight them. So my saving grace, if there's any saving grace at all in this situation, I know what to do. I know, and I have the sustainability. Thank God that I don't care how long it takes, and I commend these other families on the phone lines. But just know that there is no statute of limitations on murder. Okay, and if you feel in your heart to continue it. You know, go the distance. You know, and I just urged them to just follow their heart because I'm going the distance. You know, with every breath in my body. I met Myrlie Evers 4 years ago, and I told Myrlie, and I talked. You know, it took Myrlie Evers 30 years to get a justice for Medgar. 30 years, okay? Hopefully, I don't have 30 years. You know, I doubt if I'll be here in 30 more years. You know, but the message is simple. You know, if your heart and your gut tells you to continue on, you know, forget the civil suit. Yeah, that's just all about money. That's all that is money, okay? And I still haven't gone to trial for that, as I shared with you earlier, you know, because they've been dragging it out and dragging it out. We had a special prosecutor in our case, a special prosecutor who's supposed to be, the unbiased one. And they didn't realize until I called them on it. I said, listen, this special prosecutor does not serve a purpose at all if his boss is still the Attorney General of Ohio, okay? So if his boss is telling him still to go in the grand jury proceedings, which is the ex parte proceeding, which means you're in there alone. Nobody else is in there, okay? You can make up anything you want. That prosecutor can tell that jury anything you want. They can talk about the football game, what have you, okay? You'll never know what they're talking about. He went inside the prosecutorial proceedings, and he justified the police. They went with it, but then he came outside immediately when the grand jury proceedings were over, and he justly said that my son was essentially murdered. He said, Mr. Crawford did not commit a crime that day. He did nothing wrong. They shot and killed someone who did not deserve to die. These are the words of the special prosecutor. Now you tell me, then if that's the case, if he'd have said those words outside, surely he could not have said them inside for the verdict to come back no bail.
Yeah.
We couldn't even get an indictment, much less talk about a conviction. We didn't even get an indictment on the state level.
Do Jerry, are you there, Jerry? I know you've got your mic muted at the minute, but if you can hear.
Yes,
So when you're hearing the passion and the pain of these fathers, what advice would you give someone like John who continues to battle even after 4 years for the loss of his son? And you've just heard the circumstances in which he did lose his son.
He's absolutely right, and he's absolutely spot on in that you just continue to fight. There is no statute of limitations on murder. But he's going up against absolute immunity for prosecutors, and he's going up against qualified immunity for police officers. And I remember I saw part of the CTV on his son, and I believe his son never even raised the weapon in a threatening manner.
That's correct.
So when you have an officer in 0.3 of 1 second shooting without any kind of drop the weapon, talking him down, it's heartbreaking. It's devastating, and it's absolutely corrupt. And until we get prosecutors and judges and special prosecutors and state attorney generals who will uphold the law in an unbiased manner, we're going to continue to have these kinds of travesties. And John was also correct. There is a judicial bias in the American jurisprudence. What many of you don't know is I'm also pursuing my doctorate in criminal justice. And I was doing a study just recently on due process, and I showed stats that white males or white individuals get probation or parole 55% of the time, where African Americans get it about 28% of the time, and Latinos or Hispanics get it 14% of the time. And the when you look at it from a statistical background on the amounts of people of color in the judicial and prison system opposed to the amounts of people that are Caucasian, those numbers show an absolute bias, and there's no way around it. And as a white male, I find that atrocious.
I really admire your honesty and your integrity, Jerry. Always have done from the day that I met you, which is why I invite you back on the show over and over again. But at what point do we start making changes? Where does the battle start? How can these fathers, what should they pursue in order for them to be able to see the change they need to see in order for justice to prevail in their cases?
In my opinion, it starts with transparency laws and changing of transparency laws, where once an investigation is concluded, it must be open to disclosure. I mean, it's going to be redacted. There's going to be names and social security numbers and dates of birth that need to be redacted. But the actual investigation needs to be open for scrutiny. That's the first step. And the second step is that absolute immunity for prosecutors have got to change. I would probably look at a legislative laws to change. We're working in Idaho to change the transparency laws, but we're up against teachers associations and everything else because they don't want their personnel records or their disciplinary actions available to the public. And as a citizen and as a taxpayer, you're entitled to that information. Some of it redacted, but you're still entitled to it. And without that, you can't hold the police accountable and you can't hold the prosecutors accountable. Prosecutors take the position, I have absolute immunity. It really doesn't matter what I do or don't do. You can't touch me. And yet they also have a lack of transparency. They don't have open records in their files or anything else. So when they decide to hide a document that is exculpatory and it gets discovered 20 years later or 5 years later, and in a post-conviction process, it's just a lot of work. And then their response is less than 2% of prosecutors that have been ruled to have conducted misconduct ever get disciplined. And when they do, it's nothing more than a public censure.
You know, there are far too many mistakes taking place, far too many innocent people being killed, far too many corrupt officers getting away with murder, far too many prosecutors not doing their job, far too many investigations not being pursued or prosecuted appropriately or properly, and far too many people suffering in pain, lacking the support and the resources needed to get them through a most difficult time. There are many groups that support women and mothers who go through these things, and Yolanda and her team on Post Protect Our Stolen Treasures are just one of many. But there don't seem to be any organizations that really support fathers and men who are grieving for their sons as well in all of this. My heart, it breaks when I hear John and Victor and Brian and, you know, the two Brians, by the way. I'm not being preferential, so there's two Brians on here. But again, we're going to reiterate, because this is not a race issue. I mean, again, you know, John Crawford has hit the stats. You know, a person of color is 9 times more likely to be a victim of unlawful killing than a white guy. But the white guys are getting killed. We're just not hearing about it, right? But it's the amount of mistakes that are being made where someone is not in the, and I've often used this phrase, where someone is not in the pursuit of criminal activity, right? And with a lot of the time, we're also talking about individuals who have no criminal history or relationship with local law enforcement officer. They're not known to the local sheriffs or the local, you know, these are people that are living a somewhat unblemished life, so to speak. There are so many that are grade A students and doing degrees and end up getting caught in the backlash of these corrupt officers. If we were talking about gang bangers and rapists and murderers and crooks and thieves and robbers who are being gunned down in police chases, none of us would be here sitting down on this particular show, you know, as passionate as we are right now. I still believe that, you know, everybody deserves to die with dignity, no matter how or what you do or who you are. But we are talking predominantly about law-abiding citizens who are not in pursuit of criminal activity, who don't have a current or running relationship with local law enforcement, who are not known to law enforcement, and yet their families spend so much time digging through this mud trying to get to the truth of how their loved ones died, let alone getting through the justice part where you try to teach your children when you do wrong things there are consequences, but these families are not seeing that, because the impact is not just on the mothers and the fathers. The impact are on the brothers and the sisters and the children and the grandchildren and all the other family members that are affected and impacted by this loss, whose impression and observations of law enforcement and what that means, right, will change. So the whole law enforcement, police, authority, respect levels and all of that goes with it, right? The local authorities, the local government or the national government are doing nothing to make that a good standing thing in a community. So where do we as a nation, where do we as a people, what happens next, do you think? And I think I'm just going to throw this one out to Jerry. Oh, go on.
Kirby, let me jump in in a minute, and then I'll shut up and let other people to jump in as well. I agree with what you're saying, except I have one major exception. You said there's far too many mistakes. These are not mistakes.
That's correct. I agree.
These are absolute abuses of authority, and there's no other way around it. There's no way to soft pedal that. Rarely, I mean, if it's a mistake and an officer made a mistake, okay, that's one thing, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing deliberate actions taken that even with their training and authority is beyond the scope of that training and authority. And, you know, we as officers, we get involved in the business for a couple reasons. One, people like to serve. Yes, that's true. Two, it's a good profession and it provides a great retirement. And three, by and large, people that get into law enforcement are adrenaline junkies. There's no way around it. We like to go fast and run the risk of having to point a gun at somebody or have a gun pointed at you, because when you're done, there's an adrenaline dump that happens. And officers readily know this and they talk about it. The problem is there's also an adrenaline dump that comes when you exceed your authority and get away with it. And we're seeing a lot of that. These are not mistakes by and large. These are deliberate actions. And the way to solve that is the power to implement change is in any government entity has always rested with the citizens. Only fear and complacency stand in our way. We need to get together, band together. Women are so much better banding together in grief situations and supporting one another than men are. And men need to get together and come together as one voice and bring about change. And I'll be quiet. Somebody else to speak up.
Hey, Kervin, could I give you some details on Devon's?
Yeah, coming in, Brian.
I want to give you Officer Frost's version was that as soon as Devon jumped up, he immediately started pummeling him, beating him so bad that he totally lost consciousness, and he didn't remember a thing till he was pulling his gun out. They were approximately 25 feet from the car, and this is Frost's story, that he didn't remember nothing until he come to and Devon's on top of him, pounding him with both hands, beating him into submission, and he pulls out his revolver. His first shot jams, so while Devon's beating on him, he clears his gun, proceeds to shoot Devon 7 times while Devon is sitting straddling his waist. And the facts are, after Devon got up, it was 13 seconds from the time Devon was tased until he was shot. The officer had a body cam on. 7 seconds into the encounter, they are still standing in the road. And in that video, if you listen close, you can hear Devon plead with the officer. He never swears at that officer. He never calls him one thing other than officer and sir the whole time. And in the middle of that video, listening closely with headphones, you can hear Devon go, "Officer," you know, he knows he's going to do something. So the reality is, Devon had 6 seconds to get this officer 25 feet, get on top of him, beat him, and have all them shots. And if you was straddling someone, and the officer shoots you 7 times, you're going to be shot pretty much straight on. Devon had bullets from every angle, 2 of them in each hand, 1 down through his chest, 1 up his arm, and the final shot was right the muzzle on top of Devon's head. And that was the final shot. The officer had almost 0 blood on him. And this is things the judge points out. The officer has no blood on him. And his story is so far from reality that it's unbelievable. And the medical examiner, Devin, has a clear boot print on his side. He said he never touched Devin, never had a chance to do anything. Devin has a clear boot print, as clear can be on his side. Medical examiner never mentions it. State police investigator never mentions it. No one ever says anything. Devin was he was far more bruised up than the officer. And they can make up stories and they don't even have to go with the facts. That's what I just couldn't believe that. And now, since this has happened, I see all these other cases of police brutality. I didn't know nothing about this stuff. And the amount of horrendous injustice now that I see is just mind-boggling. And I don't know what we do about it, except police got to be held accountable. Right now, someone referred to it already. All they got to do is say, I feared, and they can do anything they want.
And that's because of the ambiguity of the language. They know what they can say, and 99.9% get away with it. I think a few years back, when my son actually got killed, I think we had 1 to 4%, and I may be being a little liberal here. 1 to 4% of police were convicted. Now there's a difference between indicted and convicted, and oftentimes we get very emotional when we hear the word indictment and not hear it, not carry the case on to convictions. You can get an indictment. Indictment is nothing. I mean, that's just saying there's probable cause or something there. What you need to listen for is the conviction. Okay, so when you talk about why they can say and make up these just outlandish stories, fabricate these things, it's because they know that the theme of all they need to say, the paradigm is always the same. They felt threatened for their lives, and so that's what the verbiage, the rhetoric, if you will, even in the Fourth Amendment, even though we have things that's constitutionally clear, said in order for you to engage in lethal force, there must be imminent risk or danger there. And that's written. That's clear to me. But when you put there's a lot of ambiguity in there too, and that's hard to measure. For case by case situations. Because you get into the thing of, there's a lot. It's ambiguous. It's vague. It's sometimes it's relative. What you fear, I may not fear. And until you get that out of until we get something concise, okay, and more or less less ambiguous with the language, and that's going to have to be through legislation. And what the good man said, Jerry, there are some ways to do it, but that's where our focus needs to be, because if it's not there, that way you can have that accountability issue with your prosecutors, with your judges, whomever the authoritarians, if you will, may be at that particular time. Until that changes, it's going to be business as usual. What's going to end up happening is we're going to have more civilians killing cops. Okay, we're going to have all-out civil war because people are just tired already.
Exactly.
They're fed up. They're tired, and they're not going to continue to let their loved ones get murdered. So that's just not going to happen for too much longer. So those are the things that we should be looking at, in my opinion, my professional opinion, my humble opinion, and is that we've got to focus on accountability. And the only way we can focus on accountability is you have to have the language has got to change. That can't be their get out of jail free card.
Amen. Yep.
Their law already says, right, that an officer shouldn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, an officer shouldn't be offloading his weapon unless there's clear and imminent danger, right? Am I correct in that, Jerry?
You're correct. The problem we're having, and I agree with, I believe it was John and Brian's, basically that is the mantra. I feared for my own personal safety or the safety of others or my life, and I had to use lethal force. There's one thing in saying it, there's another in demonstrating it, and the problem is our judicial system is not requiring the officers to demonstrate that clear fear. It's one thing if I'm standing there holding a gun, an officer doesn't know if it's loaded or not. And if I'm holding it and pointing the barrel down at the ground, and I never even start to raise my hand towards that officer, that's not clear imminent danger. It's a risk, but it's not clear and imminent danger. Once I start to cock that barrel towards the officer, even ever so slightly, now there's grounds for that clear and present danger, because action always beats reaction. But the mantra is, I feared for my safety, and the courts do not require them to demonstrate that there's well-founded fear.
Not even with transparency, Jerry. That's the irony. That's the twist right there, is that they don't require them, but when they get it, we're talking about 205 cameras. We're talking about a lot of these cases now. There is transparency. We have video footage, and they're still getting off, some of them. So that's the kind of, to me, that's the kind of irony, and I agree totally with what you're saying, because it's spot on. But the irony is that, okay, what do you do with these cases with transparency? In fact, our case has made history because the expert witnesses that the police hired turned around and implicated them. So they said, wait a minute. What you say is not what happened. We have the footage. We have the transparency. That is not what happened. That young man never even knew you were of your presence, much less talking about turning towards you. The sergeant tried to get his attention, and he didn't even get his head a third of a way around. And here comes the I don't even know what the sergeant was Darko. I don't even know what Sean Williams' rank is, but here he comes around him and shoots him, not giving him a chance to do anything, So that's kind of ironic to me. But you're spot on in saying, yeah, you need to. They don't require them to demonstrate it, okay? But even with transparency, whatever happened to, if I got the evidence, there's nothing more powerful or holds more weight than evidence. Okay, even with the evidence, what tends to happen?
There's an abuse, and that's criminal.
And on top of that all, in addition to that, there are so many cases that we're hearing, right, where there has been clear corruption, a terrible error has been made and a life has been lost. And that officer has been commended. He's been promoted. He's been given an award, given promotion. I mean, how sick is that? And how does that leave the family members who are still grieving the loss when you're celebrating an officer who did something so corruptly wrong?
Yeah.
Right? I'm struggling with that. Right? So you're creating an embedded hatred. Right? That can only be systematically, right, introduced through generations. And it's going to take generations to clear. Now, I think we've left Brian Gallagher out for such a long time. Sorry, Brian.
No, this has been really interesting. John, I feel your anger and I feel your pain. I remember watching that video on the news, and I did not see anything that even remotely justified a shooting that happened. And like I say, I feel your pain, and a comment that Jerry mentioned, that that the majority of these, they're not mistakes. These people, these cops, they have that mentality. And I just want to relate something that a few years ago, Teresa and I, down here in Utah, we went to a concealed carry class. There was probably about 30 people in there for applications. The instructor was a police officer here in Utah, and he was describing an incident that he was off duty in his patrol truck, and over the radio came a bank robbery in progress. Describing that situation or that event, this officer, I mean, he became animated, and he stated in front of 30 people, "Yeah, I finally get to shoot someone." That was his comment. And there was just dead silence in this class. And he missed the whole thing. I mean, he just kept going, and he was animated on it. He jumped out of his truck, and he was, I'm going to get to shoot somebody. He forgot to put his truck in park. It rolled up and went through the bank window. But all he could think about was, I finally get to shoot somebody. And I was flabbergasted that kind of mentality. We give them a badge and we give them a gun, and they're supposed to be protecting us. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I think we all struggle to understand how innocent individuals get to lose their life, and those that take it get celebrated, patted on the back, high-fived and promoted. But, I think it's going to take more people like Jerry Summers, who's Jonathan Newton, another one who's another great adversary for this particular show and supporter of people in this. And Jonathan Newton has some very clear opinions and observations, and maybe we should have invited him on the show as well, because he believes that majority of the problems that we have in prosecuting corrupt officers who unlawfully kill our dear loved ones is that we don't actually have defense lawyers equipped and experienced in that type of law that can help us or help you guys appropriately defend it in a constructive way. 9 times out of 10 you get some second-rate lawyer who normally deals with a car theft down on his high street. I think it takes a particular type of barrister, lawyer, who has a real understanding of this type of law and the pursuit of justice in this kind of area, that's going to enable individuals, families like yourselves, to be able to get closer to a successful prosecution, legal prosecution, where we're not just prosecuting for financial reward, but we're also getting a legal criminal conviction where the officer serves real hard time. Because I think until we start getting officers serving hard time, the settlements mean nothing. And I'm with Brian Guilford on that, and I know there are so many others who felt forced to take a settlement because that would be the only way of gaining some form of a success, however minimal that may appear. But the real proof of the pudding, the real cake, is getting the officers to serve real hard time, to get a conviction, to get those officers not just off the force, but off the streets, to make sure that these officers don't get to wear or carry guns anymore and no longer pose a risk or a threat to innocent individuals out in the street. They can't go and get security jobs where they can be allowed to carry guns again. We had the security officer who, I forget which case it was, but we've had security officers who have also been able to shoot and kill innocent, unarmed individuals and get away with it. We just need to find ways of really getting a successful prosecution in a court of law that gets a conviction and a proper sentence. And then that starts sending out the right message that officers will begin to realize that they can't just get away with it. Now, I would like to see how, organizations across America are looking towards bringing about the kind of reform that sees officers stand a better chance of a criminal conviction rather than the local state paying a financial burden onto the to the victims, because it seems that it always falls on the state to pay, and then the culprit gets away scot-free, keeps his job, keeps his pension, carries on living his life as if nothing happened, with the potential and possibility to kill another innocent individual. So until we start getting criminal convictions where these officers are serving hard time, and I understand why they don't want to serve hard time, because once they get on the other side of that fence and they're now caught up with the guys that they put there, then their life's not going to mean much. But that's, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. It's the same sort of game that we've got to play. I can't understand why the rules are so lopsidedly in their favor that there is so much corruption put in the way of them actually facing justice than weeding them out because they're bad cops. Now, I'm kind of making a statement more than asking a question, so I don't know where I'm going with this. But maybe possibly, John H., I think, with your knowledge of the system, I suppose your challenge to authority is a lot more assertive. How do you start imparting that same sort of assertive mentality into other people that it's not just you fighting that kind of battle?
That's a good question, Kervin. My whole thing with it is what I try to share with families and try to stay mindful of is, and essentially you just hit on it. You were spot on in terms. There's this thing called reciprocity. The reason why civilians don't go around killing police is because there's a fear factor involved, frankly. They know that in all 50 states, one of two things is going to happen. And to me, they're both death sentences. Either you're going to get either capital punishment or you're going to go to prison for life if convicted. Okay, period. So having said that, I mean, that's why civilians don't go around just killing cops. That same type of mindset needs to be redirected towards the cops also. It needs to be inverted. They need to fear that, hey, if I get convicted, if I do something, if I go out here and commit a crime on a civilian and they have the evidence and I get convicted, the exact same things, same punishment consequence needs to apply. There's this sense of, it's almost a sense of reverence, if you will, that police officers are given, and it's because you have to understand that from a systematic standpoint, the police are the enforcers of the politicians who make the laws. Okay, so that's why you hear, if you look up the etymology of the word, I mean, it's there in the etymology of the word. Just like in the etymology of the word judge, there's bench involved. So when you add, and I'm just kind of hit real quick on a little maritime law, but what I'm trying to tell you is that they're systematically, and we've all hit on it today, that's the core, that's the root of the problem, and we've been indoctrinated to think that we've been indoctrinated to the point that we invested, we're all in, that's why when, from kindergarten, we've been trained that the officers are friendly. They're supposed to be the good guys. Yeah. So this is the same thing with the court system. They're all on the same team. The prosecutor, the judge, the attorney general, they all sleep in the same bed, if you will. So it's going to be very difficult. They might, hey, John, well, we're going to get you a lawyer. We're going to do the best we can. Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you. And I think Jerry indicated it earlier. He was spot on. And I used to hear this in training. There is an us against them mentality. He was spot on with that. And that's the part that you have to change. It's not us against that. It's everybody for everybody. But if you break the law, there will be consequences. That doesn't just apply to the citizen. It applies to the police as well. You're supposed to be enforcers of the law enforcement. So you should be held at a higher standard. But that's not the way this thing works. That's not the way that it's designed to work. The infrastructure is not there for it to work that way. But we believe that it is. Yeah. See, that's the thing, that the commoners believe that this is the way it works, and only to find out later that, and some of us will never find out. And I pray to God some of them will never find out. Some of these families will never find out at the expense of losing a loved one. See, now when you lost the loved one, be you black or white or Hispanic or whatever your ethnicity is, you clearly see that That's not the way that it works. You clearly see that they are going to take care of each other as diligently as they can, as diligently as they can. They're going to take care of each other. It doesn't always work out for them, but it does most of the time. 97% of the time, it works out for them.
Yeah. Let's just quickly jump onto Victor, because Victor, you have been very successful in getting police fired and that. And we did ask you earlier on to just summarize that for us as to what was the total outcome of that. And again, if somebody has been successful in rooting out bad or corrupt officers, maybe you could be looking at, as you continue to campaign for justice, but go around to some of the other campaigns and share with them the methods, the tools, and the resources that you used, and the way you went about challenging the authority in order to get the success that you got, and using the momentum that you have in supporting other projects, so to speak.
Oh, yes. What we had to do was research and see how many of those officers was bad, because, again, the families were either when they accepted money, they settled or whatever. Most of them was like $50,000 for the life of their loved one. Well, we wasn't in it for the money. We were looking for justice. So we were researching those officers in which all the bad had done. And then we had the help and assistance of a reporter from MSNBC who was doing more research on it, and then they came up with the videos. Once we got the videos out and the officer's name, they didn't want to release the officer's name, but we started, the videos were made public, and so you started seeing those officers, and then we cried out to the Justice Department to actually investigate not only our case, but to investigate the whole sheriff department. And once we got that going, it was able to find out, and most of them, they turned on the sheriff. We got 10 officers that went to jail, but the sheriff was indicted and went to court, and he was acquitted. And what they did, they changed the venue to a place where that it was less, and that nobody was going to, didn't know anything about the case. It was very seldom because, we didn't get a lot of national media. So therefore, we had to stay with the local and then keep crying. And wherever we could, we was calling out the names of those officers. Well, because the media, even though the officers were indicted, the officers pled guilty to those to the atrocities in which they inflicted on the individuals while in the jail. And these were all hand-picked individuals by Sheriff Louis Apple, and the so-called narcotics. It was a narcotics impact team, in which he was a narcotics agent himself and supervised narcotics. And he was telling the stories. They would jump out the dumpster, throw down guns, and he did all those things. So we were able to go into just look, find those officers, research what they'd done. But they, as it was said before, they were able to keep everything that those officers done hush hush until the federal investigators came in. And even at that point, the sheriff himself, Louis Alcott, he had threatened the federal prosecutor, said he was shooting between his jurors' eyes. And so, and he also thought that he was above the law. Louis Alcott, the sheriff, did. So, that's how his deputies thought. And so once they started falling one by one, they started seeing that the evidence was stacked up against them and that we wasn't going to stop. And the one that actually, that was in my son's case, he is still practicing law enforcement, because what he did, he went to another, because he wasn't indicted. He was cleared. So and we're not letting go of that. So he's went to, now he's at possibly, I believe about his third different law enforcement agency, because every time we find out where he is, we let them know that you all have a murderer. And then the one is that now is the individual that he used to work for, a line officer. Now he is an elected official at the Youngsville Police Department, and so which he's the chief. So therefore, Justin Ortiz is the one that actually more than likely killed my son, because the other officer, they switched cars. So again, to see what the cover-up was. Well, now Justin Ortiz is working for his former boss, who didn't get indicted, but he left the police force, and then now he's an elected official.
Well, listen, guys, we are 10 minutes away from the end of our broadcast, and I've got my audience who are all in agreement that we need to be doing this again. There's just so much information, and I'm really sorry that we didn't manage to get round everybody and get everybody's story out as greatly as we would have liked to. I still think that we need to revisit Travis's story with Brian and Teresa at some point, and I think we will do in the future. I think there's just so much more to uncover with these stories that we've heard today. With Brian Guilford and Devon, I think there's a lot more to come out of that yet. But I just want to thank you guys for joining us here today, and maybe just giving you guys 90 seconds each to round up each. And starting off with Brian Gallagher, please.
I really think that everybody on here suffered a tragedy, and you can't stop. We found so many roadblocks on the way, lies, suppression of evidence, just blatant disregard for the law, because Wyoming is a good old boy state, and that's what we're fighting against. The newspapers spread lies. They're owned by the 5 or 6 of the families that pretty much run the town. The town has been notorious. Sin City was its nickname, and back in the 70s, we actually had police officers shooting other police officers and getting away with it. And now, what we get, prosecutors don't want to prosecute. The sheriffs don't want to investigate because they want to move on. They want to have a good image for the city, and people like myself and Therese and what Travis went through is just washed away. And it ain't right.
Well, we thank you, Brian, and we thank you for being on the show today and sharing with us. And we just look forward to catching up with you again at a future date. We will rebook another show to redo the Travis story in its entirety. But thank you once again for joining us. John Crawford, 90 seconds for me, please.
Well, thank you, Kirby. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all the families, and my heart goes out to you. You're in my spirit, forever, obviously. Really, one of the things I would like to do is just kind of keep in contact with with all of you if possible. I'm on Facebook. I'm just going to use these few seconds to give you my contact information, and it's actually under my government name. It's John H. as in Henry Crawford Jr. I'm on Instagram.
I can save you that, John, because we created the Facebook Messenger page, and if everybody goes into that, they'll be able to get a direct contact to your personal profile. So you use this time positively if you want to.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to really thank you for having me, Kervin, and once again, and it's always a pleasure. I got a dichotomy in my spirit, because it's a pleasure, but obviously it's a tragedy, that we have to come and talk about these stories. But I just want to take this opportunity, man, to really thank you, Jerry, the rest of the families, and we appreciate your expertise, and keep doing what you're doing. I'm looking forward to kind of talking to you. And talking to some of the rest of the families too, Victor's case, and one of the things I want to do is kind of pull together, our resources so that we can. It just helps, to put in our hearts while I'm continuing to go against the corruption that I'm going against.
Well, here's the thing. Every now and again, we do a group police brutality or reform show along with Jerry, Jonathan Newton, Yolanda McNair, and some of the other big players in activism. And John H. Crawford, I'd like to invite you into one of those shows that I'll speak to Yolanda very shortly, and we'll reschedule another one of them shows because we're due another update very soon. All right. I'd like to welcome you onto that panel. I think you'd be a tremendous asset. All right, so
thank you so much.
We will be in touch. There's a whole group of people talking about reform and what that might look like. So just bear with us, and we'll be with you. We'll be in contact with you. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. God bless. Godspeed.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Victor White, 90 seconds, please.
Yes, sir. I really appreciate it once again, and I would like to stay in contact with all those. And I think it's a great thing that we're on today, man. My heart goes out and it pours out to each one of us. That I know that we now become a part of a fraternity that we didn't volunteer for, and it is very a tragedy that it brought us together. But I know it's love that would also help us and support one another. And I am a strong supporter for those that wherever we are needed, then I'm willing to go. So once again, I appreciate everything that has been done, and we need to stay the course, and we need one another's support. You know, as I said, I heard earlier, mothers are sticking together, and I think that we should be able to come together and do the same type of, have the same type of movement, do the same type of thing.
Amen to that. Thank you very much, Victor. Jerry Summers, 90 seconds, please. How are you, sir?
Hi, terrific. And my heart goes out to everybody. I really don't have much more to add, and I will yield my time to anybody who would like to take it. Thank you for having me.
Jerry, we look forward to having you on the show again. God bless, my friend. Thank you very much for supporting us. Finally, my beloved producer, whom I've missed all evening. She's been very quiet in the background. She's not been well. How are you doing, Teresa?
I'm doing really good.
Okay, that's good.
Tonight's program was phenomenal and also heavy on the soul.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we can offer the avenue for victims to get their stories out worldwide, touching every corner of the earth. I just am so grateful that I can be a part of this. And I thought that mothers were powerful. Oh my gosh. Look at this. It's like it's going to be a Sega house.
I just sense it. I sense a change coming here.
In a way that mothers do. It was really kind of mind-boggling. And having Jerry, fantastic. Every single one on the panel. You're going to have 3 or 4 shows, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. We're going to talk later on. I need you to tie up with Yolanda. We're going to get another reform on police brutality, and I want John Crawford included, please. So I'll leave you to do the tie up with Yolanda on that. And just want to thank you all personally, really from the bottom of my heart, for trusting in us enough to share your story and open your hearts, bearing your souls to our audience. And we just look forward to catching up with you again. Please stay in contact, every single one of you. My lines are always open and I'm always available. And if you've got something that you want to refresh, renew, or bring about on another show, we'll always accommodate. But as for me, World Jam Global Radio, our time is up and we're out of here. Thank you very much.
I was terrified about sharing the vulnerabilities of people with difficulties reading and spelling words. However, I can see the value in sharing, and I have taken the time to make some notes about this in my book, Dyslexic: The Silent Difference. You can get your copy now at www.a1tribe.com or amazon.com or amazon.co.uk. Thank you again, everyone, for your support.
You see, it's here. You see. New feature coming from World Jam Global Radio in 2018. World Jam Global Top 10. To vote for your favorite artist, go to twitter.com/WorldJamGlobal or facebook.com/WorldJamGlobal. So pick the right track where you want to have in your car, at your house, a rock. At them.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're my World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.